Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's xTalks webinar. Today's talk is entitled State-of-the-Art Literature Review for EU MDR Compliance, How to Get It Right. My name is Sarah and I'll be your xTalks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Evidence Partners, who developed the content for this presentation. Evidence Partners is the creator of Distiller SR, the world's most widely used literature review software. Distiller SR helps regulatory groups manage fully compliant and audit-ready literature reviews quickly and easily. I'd also like to thank Criterion Edge. Criterion Edge is a regulatory writing company that provides outsourced writing services to the pharmaceutical and medical device industries. The company's expertise in regulatory writing best practices, honed over decades, produces superior deliverables and provides budget, resource, and timeline flexibility for regulatory managers. Criterion Edge empowers companies to deliver superior healthcare solutions. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Peter Poblenis co-founded Evidence Partners in 2008 to develop leading-edge technology that helps researchers deliver higher quality evidence faster. As a pioneer in literature review automation, Peter's passion for the subject has made him a sought-after speaker and resource. He has worked with over 250 research groups around the globe since 2001 and has published extensively on best practices and methodologies for using technology to improve the review process. Peter previously held senior management roles with Oracle, WebGain, Mitel, and Flick Software. Our second speaker for today, Laurie Mitchell, is founder and president of Criterion Edge, a global regulatory writing and safety services firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Laurie has over 15 years of experience in medical writing, pharmacovigilance management, and regulatory reporting. Laurie brings extensive experience creating and training data safety monitoring boards and clinical event committees, and working with global cross-functional teams. Having worked for 3 of the 4 major medical device sponsors, she is an expert in finding solutions to the regulatory challenges faced by sponsor organizations. Laurie holds a BSN in nursing and an MN as a cardiopulmonary clinical nurse specialist from UCLA. So without further ado, I'd like to pass control over to our first speaker today. And Laurie, you may start your presentation whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Let me just make something small here for a second. There we are. Today I will be presenting on state-of-the-art literature review best practices for EU MDR compliance, followed by my co-presenter Peter Poblenis, President of Evidence Partners, who will discuss how Distiller SR can be utilized to support the literature review for the CER state-of-the-art. Let me see. There we are. Here is the agenda for my part of the presentation. I'll begin with a discussion on how to develop a MedDev Rev 4 and MDR compliant CER state-of-the-art section by reviewing the pivotal role it plays in the clinical evaluation. then describe the content requirements to fulfill MDR regulations, and finally, review best practices on how to develop a robust state-of-the-art section for your CERs. But before I go on, I believe we have our first audience poll question from Sarah.
Yeah, that's right. This is our first poll question for today's webinar. I'd encourage all of our attendees today to vote live on the poll now showing on their screens. So this question is, are you prepared for the May 2020 deadline for the new EU MDR? There are 5 possible responses here. Maybe yes, your organization is fully staffed and plans are prepared. Maybe, so you have transitional plans, but you're worried about time and resources. Maybe you've started to put plans in place, but they're incomplete. Perhaps no, you know you're not prepared, but you're trying to catch up, or no, you will not be prepared without some help. So that question again is, are you prepared for the May 2020 deadline for the new EU MDR? And I'll leave that up for just a few more moments of voting here. Make sure all attendees are able to get their vote in. And it does look like the majority of you have voted on this poll. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll for voting and share the results with you all. Okay, so looks like 47%, almost half of the audience answered maybe they're ready for that May 2020 deadline. They have transition plans, but they're worried about time and resources. 25% said maybe they've started to put the plans in place, but they're incomplete. 21% of you answered yes, your organization is fully staffed and plans are prepared, with just 6% saying no, they know they're not prepared and they're trying to catch up, and 2% saying no, they'll not be prepared without some help. So that concludes our first poll question. I'll pass it back over to you, Laurie.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And thanks everyone for answering that poll question. It sounds like we've got a lot of prepared folks out in the audience, or at least getting there. And I think you're in the same boat with many of your colleagues in the medical device world. Well, let's move on to our next slide to talk about the state-of-the-art, specifically about the state-of-the-art in the CER and its evolution. So how has the state-of-the-art evolved over recent years? Honestly, the most radical changes that directly impacted how manufacturers present the state-of-the-art in their CERs came with the Rev 4 updates to MedDev 2.7/1 in 2016. As this slide shows, the state-of-the-art was mentioned only 4 times on 4 pages in MedDev Rev 3, and those mentions were very brief. In contrast, the content and role of the state-of-the-art are extensively described in Rev 4, with 39 mentions on 26 pages. Coming next, the regulatory framework which governs market access of medical devices to the European Union will undergo far-reaching changes as described in the May 2017 publication of the EU Medical Device Regulation, or EU MDR, which will replace the current EU Medical Device Directive and the EU Directive on Active Implantable Medical Devices. The current 3-year grace period for meeting MDR requirements, as we all know, will expire when the MDR comes into force in May of 2020. Key changes coming into effect with this regulation impact the clinical evaluation of device safety and performance, technical documentation and labeling, quality assurance, risk management, and post-market expectations, to name just a few. As part of this process, manufacturers must demonstrate that they have conducted a thorough analysis of current knowledge, state-of-the-art, to comply with the general requirement which states that the safety and performance evaluation of the device shall take into account the generally acknowledged state-of-the-art. In summary, the MDR itself provides few, if any, specific details on the structure or requirements for an MDR-compliant state-of-the-art section. This presentation explores those elements of current knowledge state-of-the-art in the context of the clinical evaluation and provides an overview of requirements and best practices that are both MDR compliant and aligned with MedDev Rev 4 guidance. MedDev Rev 4 introduced the blended term of current knowledge state-of-the-art, and as I mentioned earlier, uses it extensively throughout its guidelines. The term state-of-the-art is commonly used to describe the best, cutting edge, or per Merriam-Webster, quote, the highest level of development of a device, procedure, process, technique, or science reached at any particular time, usually as a result of modern methods, end quote. But what does it mean for the clinical evaluation process? Must the state-of-the-art only take into consideration those treatment modalities that are considered the gold standard? That topic has been debated by industry experts and notified bodies. And the general consensus seems to be that the state-of-the-art must present information and clinical safety and performance outcomes that align with best practices or currently accepted standards of care. The state-of-the-art performs the key role of establishing context for the assessment of safety and performance and acceptability of benefits and risks in comparison to other treatment options. The state-of-the-art is at the core of the CER, and it's important to emphasize that establishing and describing the state-of-the-art is not a standalone task done in isolation. The state-of-the-art section impacts and supports the entire clinical evaluation. For example, the state-of-the-art defines the safety and performance endpoints which support the data analysis presented in the clinical investigations, literature analysis, PMS, and PMCF sections of the CER. On this slide, if we look at the three bottom circles, you can see that the state-of-the-art must establish the device under evaluation within the treatment portfolio for the relevant medical condition or conditions. And if the CER contains an equivalence evaluation, the state-of-the-art outlines and justifies the criteria used for demonstration of that equivalence and data from existing treatment technologies and state-of-the-art therapeutic standards, including risks and benefits of current treatments, inform the benefit-risk assessment of the device. Those criteria are defined there. In other words, this slide tries to demonstrate the pivotal nature of the state-of-the-art section and how subsequent sections of the CER always must point back to it. What should be included in the state-of-the-art section? This is really where we're getting to the meat of the presentation. Well, Rev 4, again referencing Rev 4 because it is a very detailed guideline, it very nicely lays out a detailed contents list that notified bodies will expect to see in an MDR compliant state-of-the-art section. The suggested content is presented here in the gray box, but you can easily find it in the MedDev guidelines in Appendix A9. Although the state-of-the-art section can be placed anywhere within the clinical evaluation report, it might be preferred to place it somewhere towards the beginning of the CER, as it really does set the stage and provide a foundational reference point for the rest of the CER. By the way, I've sprinkled a few tips throughout the rest of my presentation, and here's our first one. One tip is to employ best practice search and screening methodologies to identify relevant clinical data for your state-of-the-art. Distiller SR can be an invaluable tool in this effort, and Peter discusses this in his portion of the presentation. So to recap, before we move on to the next slide, we've looked at the pivotal role of the state-of-the-art within the overall clinical evaluation and described the key high-level content that must be included. Next, we're going to examine best practices and some basic how-tos in developing an MDR-compliant state-of-the-art. But first, Peter and I thought it would be helpful to put the rest of our discussion within the context of a quote, actual device, rather than just talking in abstracts. So I made a device up, sort of. Let's look at it. Our fictional example device is the laser auto suture. Imagine a future world where laser technology exists to treat wounds using a new kind of wound closure device. Seen here is an example of how the laser auto suture can be employed to instantly approximate the skin edges of small, non-complicated wounds. So please keep this device and its technology and other known competitor treatments and devices in mind as we go through the steps of developing a robust MDR compliant state-of-the-art. Building a state-of-the-art section is really like telling a story. You start at the beginning, you go to the middle, and when you reach the end, stop. You can look at it in a stepwise fashion with stages. First, stage 0, the identification, planning, and scoping stage, where you identify the required content areas and relevant competitor devices. You develop your search and selection strategies. The next couple of stages are really data collection and selection and drafting. Execute your literature searches and data collection. Draft your section outline. And finally, the analysis and assembly stages allow you to finalize your state-of-the-art section. First, we'll go through the first step, identify the required content. What is the medical field and relevant medical conditions, such as wound closure and the patient population to be treated? You need to identify those. What is the target therapy, represented by the medical device under evaluation, for example here, auto suture devices? What are the alternative therapies, such as non-interventional treatment approaches and any benchmark devices and competitor devices? That could be other benchmark devices, could be another type of auto suture, competitor devices, or there's a whole list of devices we could be referring to here. Here's another tip regarding this scoping checklist. We've developed a CER scoping checklist that has proven to be an invaluable communication tool. It helps ensure that team members are aligned, gaps identified and addressed, and it supports accuracy and increases the efficiency of the very complex CER writing process. This same discipline scoping concept can be used to support the development of the state-of-the-art as well. Next, develop your search and selection strategies. What does that mean? Define the search strategies and search terms. Identify your database sources such as Embase, PubMed, etc. And consider incorporating any ad hoc internet searches if needed. Consider performing scoping searches and refine your search criteria if you're not getting the results you expect. Sometimes you may have to perform multiple searches to hone in on the results that you're wanting to find. Predefine the data types to include the appropriate level of evidence that you need to include in the state-of-the-art clinical data extraction, and inclusion and exclusion criteria for your articles that you'll be reviewing. One tip would be to conduct broadly worded database searches and consider performing separate searches to capture other relevant sources of information, most particularly such as applicable standards and guidance documents. We've found that when we do some of the database searches, the guidance documents don't show up and the standards don't show up, the professional standards and guidance document. If you're so busy looking for device names or the types of therapeutic options, sometimes you'll miss the guidance document. So that's really what that tip is about. So you finalized your literature search strategy. Now it's time to execute your literature searches and collect the data. So perform your literature searches and screen the results. Retrieve the relevant resources, full text articles, and extract relevant safety and performance clinical outcome data that are relevant to your device. And you should have already identified what those safety and performance clinical outcome data are. And finally, document your strategy and process to maintain objectivity in data selection. The notified bodies, we believe, will be scrutinizing your methodology much more closely in the months and years to come. And that's another thing that Peter will be talking about. And the tip, web-based platforms offer one approach to manage references effectively while documenting essential processes. The next step is to draft your section outline. Use your suggested content outlines from MedDev Rev 4. Again, MedDev Rev 4 provides a very nice structure for how the state-of-the-art can unfold. Determine the logical structure. This is really where we're beginning to write the state-of-the-art. So we're going to outline it first. We're going to determine a logical structure for that outline, identify any relevant subcategories that may come up as you begin to draft it. And a tip is to sketch out alternative outlines to determine the best presentation of the data. You may need to play a little bit to see how the state-of-the-art unfolds. And we're going to get into more detail about the flow of the state-of-the-art in a moment here. And of course, the last step is to finalize the section. Analyze the supporting clinical endpoint data to determine if additional references need to be included. That's a crucial last step, is that you may find at the end of the day when you're putting your state-of-the-art together that you're missing or that you don't have enough data, safety and performance data on maybe some of the competitor devices or some of the indications. So take a look at that point to see if you need to do additional searches and pull in more data. Compile your safety and performance outcome into data tables is a wonderful way to present that data, and then develop the narrative of the state-of-the-art section. And my tip here goes back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago, which is to tell the story using a methodical, organized approach. So this is the last slide for me, and it's a busy one, so let's walk through it a little. Let's put it all together. We can walk through this slide because it shows the outline of the state-of-the-art story. And we often talk about the state-of-the-art as being somewhat of a funnel shape, where it starts broad, taking you down to the end of the story, which is very specific to the treatment option and the treatment portfolio that your medical device falls within. So start broad. You must define the medical conditions or problems that your medical device is related to. You describe it, you describe the course of those medical conditions, the forms they take, the course, and the epidemiology. And you must do that for every relevant medical condition that your device treats. So that can sometimes be a very broad part of the state-of-the-art section, but it begins to set the stage. And then you move on down the funnel to where you're beginning to narrow it now. Now you're beginning to talk about, you've set the stage, and now you want to talk about the current accepted role of available interventions for those medical conditions. And those available interventions really tend to fall into two buckets: the conservative treatment options and the interventional treatment options. And because these are all options that may be available to a patient that has that medical condition that you've been describing, in this case, a superficial wound that needs to be closed. So what would be the treatment options, conservative treatment options for a superficial wound? Pharmacologic, possibly not, but for many other devices, you may describe pharmacologic treatment options. Often watch and wait observation is a conservative treatment option that's discussed in the state of the art. But it's really the interventional treatment options where you begin to narrow towards your, excuse me, towards your medical device. And there may be a few. So in the case of, again, wound closure, what would be some interventional treatment options that are commonly available? Sutures, staples, surgical glue, those are all interventional. And those are options available to the patient that has a superficial wound that must be closed. So each of those options are discussed, including auto suture, because that is now you're getting into the area in which your device falls. Auto suture, staples, other types of manual suturing, you're discussing all of those intervention options right here in this section. But now you've gotten almost to the bottom of the funnel where you've introduced auto sutures as a treatment option, and you begin to now discuss only that. And this is where you're introducing the clinical safety and performance benchmark data for auto suture devices, in which your device under evaluation falls. And so this is the meat of the matter when it comes to the state of the art, is that you're beginning to establish just in this very last section of the state of the art where your device falls within state of the art, and you're presenting clinical safety and performance outcomes that benchmark that. And then you've introduced your device and perhaps its competitors, and you're comparing them in perhaps head-to-head systematic reviews or meta-analysis type of review data where you can establish those benchmarks. And that takes us to the end of the state of the art, how you get through that section, and that it sets up a great segue for the rest of the CER. So let me go to my last slide. Oh, that's with evidence partners. And now I want to thank you for your attention during this section of the presentation, and I'll hand it over to Peter.
Great, thanks very much, Laurie. Assume someone will tell me if you can't hear me, so I'm assuming you can. So Laurie really focused on the what needs to be done to put together a good state-of-the-art lit review. My focus is more on the how we do it from a very hands-on, pragmatic perspective. We're going to quickly go over what the notified body expects to see, again, from a very practical implementation side of your CER lit reviews and your state-of-the-art lit reviews. We're going to go over some of the common issues that we're seeing amongst organizations that are just getting into doing these lit reviews and where they're having some issues today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how and why you might want to use a tool like Distiller SR to help with the lit review process. You know, to basically lighten your load a little bit and give you something that's going to survive an audit at the end of the day. And then we'll just spend a couple of minutes walking through at a very high level what Laurie's auto suture state-of-the-art lit review would look like in a tool like Distiller. So just to show you, how that would work for you in real life. Before we go there, though, I think Sarah has one more poll question for us, and then we'll move right into the next section.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks very much, Peter. This is our second and final poll question for today's talk. If audience members weren't able to get their vote in on that first poll, I'd encourage them to go ahead and vote now on the poll that's showing on their screen. And this question is, have you signed on with a notified body for MDR yet? Only 3 possible responses for this one. Perhaps yes, you have a relationship with a notified body. Maybe you're in the process of contracting with a notified body, or no, you've not yet taken any action with a notified body. Again, that question is, have you signed on with a notified body for MDR yet? And I'll just leave that up for a few more moments here. Make sure you're all able to get your vote in on this final poll question for today's webinar. And it does look like quite a few of you have voted. So let's go ahead and take a look at those results. All right, the majority of the audience, 85%, answered yes. They have a relationship with a notified body. 8% said no, they've not yet taken any action with a notified body, and 7% said they're in the process of contracting with a notified body. So interesting results there. With that, I'll pass it back over to you, Peter.
Great, thanks very much. It's good to see that so many are already engaged. I think speaking with the notified bodies, they're going to be in short supply in the next little while. So it's great to already be affiliated with one and getting set up that way. So very quickly, my next slide just basically discusses what the notified body would expect to see in a compliant literature review. And again, in this case, we're talking a state-of-the-art lit review, but it really applies to any lit review as part of the CER process. So as Laurie alluded to, they're going to want to see a thoroughly developed search strategy. And if you don't currently have an information specialist or a librarian helping you with this, that's something I would advise looking into. That's certainly a science and an art, and these people are very handy to have in the development of search strategies. They're going to want to see also a list of the databases that you used to pull from when you were conducting your search. They'll want to see the search output, so basically all the references that were returned as a result of your search, and divided into included and excluded references. So which references did you choose to use, which ones did you choose not to use, and for those that you chose not to use, reasons why you made that decision, so why you excluded them. Coverage is important too, so making sure that your search is broad enough that you're capturing all, or at the very least, most of the relevant papers on this topic. I mean, all is the ideal, obviously. They're going to want to look at your appraisal and weighting of the relevant studies, so the studies you chose to include. They're going to want to see study summaries for those papers as well. They're going to want to see a systematic process, so a transparent, reproducible process. And that, if you're doing lit reviews today, and most folks who aren't using a tool like Distiller are still using tools like Excel, it's difficult to show a transparent, reproducible process. But that's what you're going to be expected to demonstrate. And obviously, they're going to want to see that you've used qualified participants in the various aspects of the production of that lit review. Make sure that those people are qualified for the task. So here, just based on work with a number of groups so far, a fairly large number of groups recently, here are the common points where people run into trouble. And I'll get into these in a little bit more detail in a second, but basically incomplete search coverage is often an issue. Incomplete audit trail, so documentation of your process is because it is a significant amount of overhead, it's often not done as well as it should be done. Ad hoc processes are also found quite frequently, and you end up with reviews that look more like narrative reviews than systematic reviews, and those won't really pass muster at the end of the day. Data integrity, so just errors in the data set, which are extremely common in literature reviews because they are so operationally intensive and involve so much data. And then just lastly, but probably as important as anything on here, is efficiency. We have a lot of these lit reviews to get through, and I haven't met a single organization that says they have too many staff or too much time to do it. So this is obviously an issue that most of us are facing today. So to dive into this in a little bit more detail, incomplete search coverage. So the most common reason we see for incomplete search coverage is it takes us an awfully long time to screen references. So we're going to try to limit the search as best we can so we don't get too many excluded references there, so we can get through the search faster. Not a great strategy. Better strategy is to find better ways to screen more references quicker and ensure that you've got full coverage. You don't want the notified body calling you up and saying, did you guys include the paper by so-and-so because it's important? And you don't really want to have the answer that, no, we missed that one. And that's based on a couple of true stories that I've heard in the field where important papers were left out of the lit review, and it kind of invalidates your results. And you basically have to go back to the drawing board and resubmit. Incomplete audit trail is obviously an issue too. Basically, if you're not using a tool that manages the process, then you basically have to document the whole process by hand. And that's a time-consuming thing to do, and oftentimes steps get missed in that documentation. And the result is you don't really have a truly reproducible result because the process documentation isn't there. Ad hoc processes, again, a lot of times these are done by one or two people. They're done differently for different reviews, everyone following their own particular processes. That makes it very hard to scale. It makes it hard to bring in additional people to help out. It also makes it much more challenging if you need to update your review at any point in time, which you probably will have to do. If everyone's doing it slightly differently, an update can often result in a complete rewrite, and you definitely want to avoid that because of the obvious efficiency issues that you're going to hit. Data integrity is, again, something we see quite frequently. Just simple things like version control. So again, if you're capturing data into Excel, Excel is not a good tool for managing collaborative data capture, and it also doesn't have a version control system in it. So if data gets changed, there's no record of it being changed. Things like simple transcription errors, cut and paste errors also do introduce errors into your data set. Other efficiency issues. So again, if you've done lit reviews before, none of this is going to come as a surprise to you, but basically manual data collation, so taking data from multiple sources or multiple participants in a lit review and collating it all together takes time. Manual preparation of the reports, so simple things like data tables, Prisma flow diagrams, that kind of stuff takes time to produce. Tracking down records, so where is everything stored? Where are the PDFs and the references that are associated with these particular pieces of captured data and so on? How do I get the materials needed for the review out to my participants who are helping with the review? A lot of times we're involving subject matter experts or consultants who may not be on premises, and we need to get these materials out to them and get them back. And how do we do that? You know, are we using Dropbox? Are we using email? That sort of thing. And then just reliable storage of these reviews, because again, these reviews typically do get updated from time to time. How do you keep everything related to that review in one place so that at update time, you just basically open it up and start pick up where you left off? And that's becoming an issue for a lot of folks as well. So where does a tool like Distiller fit into this whole process? Essentially, if you were to look at your process today, you typically develop your search strategy, conduct your search against all of the relevant data sources that you hit. Could be PubMed, Embase, Ovid, Cochrane, could be Google Scholar, whatever it is you're hitting. Then you typically screen those references for relevance, and as you do that, you track which references you're excluding and why you're excluding them. Then you typically go on to full text screening as well, so abstracts that survive title and abstract screening typically undergo full text screening. And the references that make it through that entire screening process then move into data extraction, where you're looking at outcomes information, appraisal information, study summary data, that type of thing, which you're basically taking the references and you're codifying them. You're pulling out the bits and pieces of information you need for your report and putting them into tables typically. At the end of the day, you're taking those tables and generating reports from them. You know, just think simple things like included, excluded study lists, Prisma flow diagrams, your standard MedDev tables, and so on. So that's those are all just practical pieces. Distiller and tools like it basically fit into the screening, extraction, and reporting phases of the process. So you still do your search the way you do today. You dump those search results into the tool. You develop your screening criteria in the tool, conduct the screening in the software. Data extraction also happens in the software, and the reporting is generated from within the software. And by doing it all within the software, you ensure a complete audit trail. And in fact, your protocol, as you've built it in the software, becomes your documentation of the protocol, because the software essentially represents that documentation. It also produces a structure that is reproducible and systematic, and also scalable, and you can move, you can do different subjects, different products, use different staff and so on across multiple reviews, because you basically created a structure for them. So that's really where the tools fit in. It's all very, just very practical. It's not really rocket science. It's just managing the process. And what you get at the end of the day is something that, at least from a methodological perspective, is regulatory compliant. You are doing things in a fully transparent, auditable, and reproducible manner. In doing so, you introduce a lot fewer errors into your data set. You can't get transcription errors if there's no manual transcription. If it's all happening within the system, you're going to have cleaner data. You also produce typically what becomes a living dossier of reviews. These all live within a system. You can open them at any time. You can update them as need be. And they're all wrapped in a standardized process, which is essentially your process but embedded within the software. So you can define how that process should work within the software, and now you've got a method to enforce that process so that all of your reviews have the same approach and have the same structure to them. So that's why you would use a tool like Distiller. Ultimately, it comes down to it'll cut the time to do a review by about half, and it gives you something that's going to survive an audit. Those are the two primary reasons for using a tool like that. So without further ado, I'm going to just zip right into the software itself and just give you a very, very quick overview of what that might look like in practice. So I'm logged into Distiller right now. This is a web-based software, so it's collaborative. Multiple team members can be working in the same project at the same time. I'm logged into Laurie's auto suture review. I can see all of the different ongoing lit reviews that I'm working on in the system. They're all available to me, and I can quickly find them. I can see down here, this is my to-do list. So in this particular case for auto suture, we created a protocol that started with title and abstract screening, went on to full text screening. We did some safety and performance. We did some appraisal for criteria for suitability and so on. So these are just the stages in my workflow that each reference will pass through as we conduct our review. So again, this is sort of documenting our protocol. Within the review itself, I can assign people to different stages in this workflow. I'm assigned to all of them, so I can see right now we've loaded as a result of our search, we've loaded 2,199 references into this project that still requires screening. So what does screening look like in a system like this? I'll hit the unreviewed list. I see a list of all the references. I can see where they came from. I can see when they were loaded into the project, and I can just pop one open and start screening. So now I'm looking at a screening form that I developed for this particular project. And what this questionnaire on the right-hand side is, in this case, is a bunch of reasons to exclude a reference. So this was the first stage of our screening. We were just looking for reasons to exclude the reference, and these are them. This form can be as simple or as complex as I need it to be. I can ask any questions that are related to inclusion and exclusion, and I can capture that data here. On the left-hand side, I'm presented with the abstract as it came from PubMed, and at the top, I can see the bibliographic information also as it came from PubMed. I can also see that some of the words are underlined with different colors. This makes it a lot easier for my reviewers to find potentially relevant information faster, and it also prevents them from missing relevant terms as they go through the process. So these can be easily defined on a project-by-project basis. You can assign colors to them and just basically enhance your review efficiency. If I was doing the screening right now, I would just go in. I could say, well, yep, this meets certain exclusion criteria. In fact, it looks like it's an uncontrolled. Actually, it's not. It's going to be another reason. Not an RCT, for example, not a randomized controlled trial. So I've just completed this form. I'm going to hit submit. When I hit submit, this data goes into the database associated with this reference. My name is attached to it, and it's timestamped. So we know who did the research, who did the screening, and when it was done. So I hit submit, just takes me to the next reference in my list. And I just keep going through the screening process like this. So I can have multiple people working on the same project at the same time. The system will ensure that we don't step on each other's toes. It'll make sure that we don't accidentally screen the same references. It'll allocate them out for us. And that's really what the screening process looks like to someone using a tool like this. It's very simple to use. There's no data collation at the end of the day. There's no way to introduce transcription errors, and everything's being recorded in real time in the database. And because of that, I can monitor the process. I can see that I've knocked off a couple of references from my list already here. I can see how things are going. I can see that we're about 3% of the way through our screening for this particular project. We had a pretty large search result here to get through, basically, but I can basically keep on top of it. Over here, I can actually see my inclusion-exclusion ratios. So right now, it's almost 26% of all references that we're screening at title and abstract screening are being included. If that was more like 1%, I might have an issue with my search. Maybe my search was not delivering the results I'd expected, and as such, maybe I need to go back and reevaluate before I continue screening through the remaining 2,000 references. Let's correct that problem right now. And having these reports in real time makes it a lot easier to spot these kinds of issues. Let's look at a few other simple reports. So for example, exclusions. You typically want to include a list of included and excluded references along with reasons for exclusion in any CER lit review. So how do you generate a document like that? Systems like this will look at your protocol, i.e. it'll look at the screening forms that you've developed, and it will identify the different reasons you identified for excluding references. It will tell you how many references were excluded for each of those reasons, and at the end of the day, it can produce a list of those references and export them for you for submission or inclusion perhaps as an appendix in your lit review. So I'm just going to open up this Word document. And there's my list of excluded references, along with why we chose to exclude them. We also recorded who did the screening, when it was done, how long it took each person to read them. It's all captured in here. But this would be a standard exclusion report that you would include in your lit review. Some of the guidance shows Prisma flow diagrams. If you've done Prisma flow diagrams, you probably realize they're not that fun to make. The system will automatically generate one for you and download it to your machine. So this is a full-on Prisma flow diagram, fully populated with how many references we found in the search. We didn't have any dupes in the system. Distiller will automatically detect the duplicates for you. Shows that we screened 74 references so far, excluded 55, and how many for each of these reasons. Again, just a standard Prisma flow diagram, but these can take hours and in some cases days to produce manually. And you can again introduce errors as you do that manually. The system will do that, will prevent you from having those errors, and you can generate this at any time. Let's take a look, for example, at some of our actual data we've extracted. So let's look at some summary data that we've extracted from our references. So we've gone into the reporting tool, and here's some summary data that we've pulled out. So here's the reference that we've done the extraction from. Here's some of the study details we've extracted. Outcomes measures and outcomes. Again, what you've extracted is up to you. You develop the protocol. But here's where some of these things get pretty interesting. So what happens if we're looking for a particular outcome? Well, let's just start typing. Okay, so we have two references that had death as an outcome. So we can find our data very quickly in here. Let's say, for example, we want to take a look at this particular paper. We're not sure that this data was correct. We've reread the paper and we're not sure it's right. Well, let's find out where this data was captured. And here's where we can show the total provenance of every cell of information in our report. So this particular cell is in question, no problem. Let's click on the cell. It opens up the original form that data was captured in. We know who captured the data. Here's the abstract they were reading when they captured the data. And here's the full text document that they were reading as they pulled that data out. So if we need to go back and take another look at something, everything's right here at our fingertips. We can find it. If need be, if we have the correct permissions, we can edit these cells of data. But if we do, those changes are audited and they're version controlled. So you do have a complete record of how you got where you are, and basically you're able to demonstrate that. So what I've been talking about primarily now is how we capture the data, and we're sort of showing how the data becomes transparent because we can track it from any cell in any table right back to its source. One of the other things that might happen if you're doing a lit review is you might be getting halfway through it, or maybe you've finished it, and you're about to write up your final report. You get a call from your colleague and they say, "Did you guys include the paper by Zhang because it's very important?" I don't remember. We went through over 2,000 references. So let's just go up here and take a search. Yep, this is the paper we're talking about. We did process it right through to the 5th stage of our workflow, so it is included in our search. Let's take a look at what we pulled out of it. So we can see who the reviewers were at each stage in the workflow. Here's all of the data, safety and performance information that we extracted from that paper. And again, I could click on any one of these cells, open up that paper, take a look at any of those forms, and so on. So it just makes it really easy to basically keep track of everything. Just going back, let's take one last look here at another standard report. This one might look familiar to you. So appraisal information. The nomenclature in the guidance looks like this. So you can make your output look exactly like it looks in the guidance document. So if you need to show this appraisal information as a table in your CER lit review, no problem, it's built for you. You can just say, okay, I'm going to export that to Word, run the report, and there's my table ready for inclusion in my lit review. So don't want to spend any much more time than that. These are just sort of some of the high points, but the key takeaways are that you can basically take whatever protocol you're using today, configure it in a tool like this one, and then you've now created a structure that manages the whole process for you. And on top of that, everything related to the review is living in this project. So all of your references, all of your full text documents, all of your metadata, all of your audit trail data, all lives here. And in addition to that, you can even store files that are just affiliated with your review in the file manager tool. Think of this as Dropbox. We can put our submissions in here. We can put our search strategy in here. And again, the whole thought being that everything related to the review lives in one place. There's also, of course, permission structures you can put on there to make sure people stay within the confines of what you've asked them to do. And you can also lock the project at the end of submission period so that nothing can change between now and the update period. What an update looks like in a tool like this is simply you run your search again, perhaps with some updated search criteria. You take those search results, drop them into Distiller. It's just a drag and drop process. You can upload references from any file. Run a deduplication on them, which will remove all of the references that you reviewed the first time around, and leave you just with the delta, just the references that have come in since your last update. So now those are the only references you need to look at to fully update your data set. There's lots more in here, but I don't want to take more of your time. I think at this point, we can wrap it up and open it up to any questions. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Well, thank you both very much for your insightful presentation. As you said, let's go ahead and get into that Q&A portion of our webinar. Have received a few questions here from the audience, so let's go ahead and get started. Our first question, can you talk more about how the clinical literature data from competitor devices is handled in the state-of-the-art section?
Should I take that one, Peter?
Sure, please.
Okay. So the competitor device data is the amount of detail, was that what the question was, Sarah? How much detail should be included?
Yes, it's can you talk more about how the clinical literature data from competitor devices is handled?
Okay, and then also a little bit more on the detail of that. The competitor device data that's extracted from Distiller during your searches can be presented at that very end of the state-of-the-art section where you're really talking about now the competitors in the treatment portfolio of the type of device that's under evaluation, your device. So in the case of the auto suture, the laser auto suture, perhaps there are competitors that use a different technology of laser and maybe another auto suture that uses light, let's just say, for example. Well, if you can find, meta-analysis, systematic reviews, RCT data on those competitor devices, you will have already established what are the key safety and performance outcomes you want to extract from those articles, and it's often very nice to present that in tabular form. Extract those key performance and safety outcomes and that data, build tables around it to establish what are the benchmarks, so that when you do that same thing out in the clinical literature section of the CER for your own device, you can compare back those data on your device and those outcomes back to the benchmark devices that you've identified in the state-of-the-art to then establish your device similarly in the state-of-the-art as a state-of-the-art device. A sub-question to that is, how do you identify pool data? For example, we know that often there are authors that write about studies that they might perform at their academic institution in which retrospective or even a prospective study in which they are taking, let's just say, all folks with wounds that come in, and we're going to compare this device to our device, for example. And maybe they don't, in the analysis in that paper, the data is pooled and you can't extract it. You can use that data still in the state of the art, identified as pooled data, and showing what the devices are that are used in that. And that helps. That you don't need to throw that data away because it's pooled data. You can use it in the state of the art as well. So that's a very quick question. I know there are many questions. I want to move on to any others. So I hope that helps a little.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for that answer. Our next question, you pointed out the importance of scoping the CER as a first step and mentioned a scoping checklist. What is a scoping checklist and how is it used?
Oh, thanks for that question. We developed that, Criterion Edge developed that as a tool that helps guide conversations and decisions in the early part of our relationship with the client and with a new project. Oftentimes we find that when we're working with clients, some decisions perhaps haven't been identified yet. And so a scoping checklist really is a checklist. It's about a 4-page document. It's rather tabular. It actually has yeses and nos and short little text areas that we fill out with in the kickoff meeting with our clients. And it will answer questions such as, what are the devices under evaluation? What are the competitor devices? Name them. What type of appraisal criteria do you want? What do you want to include for your inclusion exclusion? Is there an equivalence device? Does equivalence need to be established? It really goes through all of those questions that need to be identified up front. And then what we bolt onto that is a list, an Excel spreadsheet actual list of identify the risk management documents that we need. What is their internal number, the REV number? What are the clinical investigations that we will need to look at? What is the IFU? What is its REV number? Because oftentimes we find that when that data comes in, those source documents come in, we can have issues with, they sent us Rev B, not Rev C. And if we get all that identified up front, it really helps smooth out the process as you go through the CER writing process.
Great, thanks for that, Laurie. I think we've got just enough time to answer one more question here. That question came in while you were doing your demonstration there, Peter. So the question is, how do you manage to get through 2,199 references? Sounds like a lot, even though you're using Distiller SR.
Yeah, it's a lot, all right. The largest project I've seen on Distiller actually had 172,000 references, but obviously in the CER world, you can keep it under 1,000, that's pretty good. So basically the tool does, because you're not doing any of the operational management of the data, you're just basically filling out the forms and submitting, that does take some of the weight off in terms of managing the process. Having the keyword highlighting also makes the screening process at title and abstract happen a lot quicker in general. The other thing is that, and we didn't get into this, but Distiller has an artificial intelligence engine which can assist with the screening process as well. In a number of ways, including bubbling the most promising references to the top of the list so you can take a look at them, or helping you assess the relevance of references. It can help with that as well. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to contribute to it. In general, as I mentioned at the outset, Distiller users generally say that their screening time is reduced somewhere by about 40 to 60%, depending on the subject matter and domain. But it's basically through a bunch of small efficiencies rather than one large efficiency that it will help with.
All right, great. Well, thank you both very much for those answers. With that, we've reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If any of our attendees have further questions, they can direct them to the email addresses now showing on their screen. So for Laurie, that's Laurie@CriterionEdge.com. And for Peter, that's poblenis@evidencepartners.com. And you can also share this webinar on LinkedIn by clicking the link I've sent to all participants through that questions chat box. Well, thank you to everyone for participating in today's conference. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from xTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers for today, Peter O'Blenis and Laurie Mitchell. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.